So let's dive into the testing setup you need. It all starts with the general application setup for your main application, for the main code you're writing, for the product you're building, even if you don't plan to add any testing. Because that's, of course, the main thing you do. You're building some product, some application, no matter if it's a Node.js or a React or any other kind of application, you're building something and you're writing code for that, and for that you have a project. Now, that is something you definitely need, no matter if you intend to add testing or not. And that is also where you can stop already if you don't want to add automated tests. If you only plan to test your code manually by clicking around in the demo website with the development server you might have, then that is all you need. And that is what you see in a lot of projects and what you most likely also did a lot in the past. In most of my other courses, we just have a project set up without any automated tests because I focus on the core topic at hand. In the React course, I have a React project without automated tests because I focus on React features and concepts, and we test everything manually in the demo website that we get with help of the development server there. But of course, in this course, we want to dive into automated tests, and therefore we need to enhance this project setup. And the good news here is that we can merge our testing setup and our testing configuration into this main project, as you will see later in this section. Now, your project setup without the testing parts will typically also already come with some configuration and some extra tools. For example, you might be using Webpack or Vite or Babel there to optimize and transform your code, and the exact setup depends on the project you have. And very often you don't create that project configuration on your own, but instead very often you use some tool like the Create React App tool or the Angular CLI to create a project for you that comes with a certain configuration out of the box so that you can focus on the actual code you write. So that is what you always have basically, because you need that to build a product, to build an application, to write code. But then if you want to add automated tests, you need extra tools that are added to this project. For example, you need to add a test runner. You also will need an assertion library typically. But what are these things? What are these tools? A test runner, as the name suggests, is a tool that actually executes your testing code. Because tests are also just code you write, but not code that belongs to your main application or product, but instead code that's there to test your other code. And that testing code should be executed by such a test runner because it's not part of your main application code. You don't execute it together with your main application code. Instead, you have a dedicated testing tool, a test runner tool, that executes your test code only during development. Such a test runner typically automatically detects your testing code as long as you place your testing code in certain files that follow a certain naming schema, but you will learn more about that later. The test runner then also is responsible for executing your tests, gathering the results of these tests, and displaying the results of these tests. And there are different test runner tools you could add. It depends on the programming language you're using, but then you also often got multiple alternatives for one and the same language. For example, for JavaScript tests, a popular test runner is Jest. Actually, Jest is more than just a test runner, but it also is capable of running tests. But Karma would be a popular alternative. Though I will say that Jest became more popular over the past years. So that's one important part. But a test runner, as the name suggests, only executes your tests. You also, of course, need to then define what makes a test successful or not. So you don't just need to execute your testing code, but you also need some way of defining expectations, expected results, and what's treated as a success and what should be treated as a failure instead. And that's where an assertion library comes into play. Because with assertion libraries, you can define your expected outcomes, and the assertion library will then check if the code that's tested, if you're testing code, actually produces a result that matches those expectations. So whether your expectations are met. And good assertion libraries should, of course, support all kinds of possible outcomes and situations, including synchronous versus asynchronous code, and so on. Now, again, the tool you will choose depends on the programming language you're using, and even inside of one and the same language, like JavaScript, you have alternatives, like, for example, again, Jest for JavaScript or Chai. Now, as you can see on this slide already, Jest seems to be a tool that supports both aspects, which is of course great because it means you only need to install one tool and configure only one tool to get both important features you need for defining and running tests. So that's the overview of a testing setup of how it should look like and which tools are needed. In the next lectures, I will now walk you through an example project and an example setup, which also adds a test runner and an assertion library. And I will also explain why I'm actually not using Jest in this course, but instead a different tool, which in my opinion is even better and which is gaining a lot of traction lately.